This is 50 Shades of Green by Climate Group, your monthly climate podcast exploring all the essential news and views from the US and around the world. I'm Phil Kehoe. How can we quantify the real human impact of extreme weather? According to the NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, 2024 alone saw 27 individual weather and climate disasters with at least $1 billion in damages, trailing only the record-setting 28 events analyzed in 2023. Across hurricanes, wildfires, floods, tornadoes, and more, the impacts of the climate crisis are apparent. But where do we begin to measure the real toll that these disasters take on the people affected, and how do these folks carry on? In this episode, we speak to 3 members of Extreme Weather Survivors, an organization dedicated to building the community, providing support and training, and advocating for change to all those impacted by extreme weather. I join Executive Director and co-founder Chris Kocher, Melissa Whitaker, a small business owner from Montpelier, Vermont, and Erica Solove, a psychologist from Boulder, Colorado, in a discussion about what it means to make connections, stay resilient, and create positive change in the wake of the climate crisis. As the climate crisis continues, we've seen an uptick in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather. While the damage and devastation caused by these events is often apparent, what actually happens in the aftermath to the people affected by these disasters? Today, I'm speaking with 3 members of Extreme Weather Survivors: Executive Director and co-founder Chris Kocher, Melissa Whitaker, a small business owner from Montpelier, Vermont, and Erica Solove, a psychologist from Boulder, Colorado. Extreme Weather Survivors is a nationwide community of people directly harmed by disasters like wildfires, floods, extreme heat, deadly air pollution, drought, and hurricanes. It is a space for survivors to support and learn from one another, and to fight to keep these disasters from happening to more families and communities. Chris, Melissa, and Erica, welcome to 50 Shades of Green.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so welcome to the 3 of you. I would love to just get us kicked off with a bit of intros, a bit of background from each of you, and really just explaining how you got involved with Extreme Weather Survivors and what your role is within the organization. So, Chris, if we can start off with you, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks for having us. I've spent 15 years building and supporting survivor communities, first in the gun violence prevention space and then in the COVID survivor space. And after Hurricane Ian hit New York City in 2021, you remember there was a catastrophic storm where people lost their lives because the rain was so intense and so violent that it caused people to be trapped in their basements. So some of the folks that tragically lost their lives in that storm were in my neighborhood. And so I just started thinking about what I could do in this space with my experience supporting survivors and people directly impacted to bring that to bear in supporting people impacted by extreme weather.
Great. And then we can kick it over to Melissa.
Great. Hi. So I have been a small business owner of a restaurant. We own 2 restaurants fully and then another one partially in the central Vermont area, and have for 26 years. And have had little bits of flooding through the years, but in July 10th of 2023 is when downtown Montpelier completely flooded. It was the main part of most of the stores were about 3 feet underwater. Our space also had a basement, so we basically lost 2 floors of spaces in our restaurant. And I think the whole town, there was about 130 businesses that were flooded, which for a very small town is almost all the downtown businesses. And the downtown was pretty much shut down for months. And it was just extremely traumatizing and still affects us to this day financially. We're still dealing with the reeling of all of having the amounts of money to put in to rebuild and just the repercussions and the trauma and the stress of that. And I met Chris. I was doing a lot of interviews with people during that whole time and speaking out a lot, speaking with legislatures, speaking at the state house, doing just a lot of interviews. And Chris I don't know how Chris actually found me, but he reached out to me and we did an interview together. And so I have been, working with their organization whenever they ask me to speak. I do. And I do feel like I think I was really moved by their work because mostly of them wanting to hold big oil accountable and just feeling like these disasters are going to be happening. They are happening more and more and more and more. I mean, as we can see, it's really ramping up. It's so traumatizing to the people it affects. And it would be amazing if there could be some kind of compensation, because what the government gives us is not enough to really survive. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, and that the people are left like having to pick up the pieces a lot of times on their own, and it's not easy.
Absolutely. And we will certainly dive into that later into the conversation. So I'm curious to hear more about all of those. But Erica, over to you.
Yes, hi. I'm Erica Solove. So organizational psychologist is my profession just outside of Boulder, Colorado. And on December 30th, 2021, we were in between Christmas and New Year's and in a festive holiday time, eating lunch at our kitchen table. And quite suddenly, the most destructive wildfire in Colorado history came towards us, and we lost both our home and a rental property across the street as a result. And so just in the matter of moments, our lives changed forever. And now we are 3 years later and in our rebuilt home. But that experience, the silver lining of it, gave me a passion for this work and this topic. And so when the fire in Hawaii happened, I just couldn't ignore it. And I started to post on their Facebook groups and trying to organize peer network support. And I think Chris found me as a result of that effort. And we stayed in touch for the past year, and just about a month ago started working officially with extreme weather survivors, and have been so enjoying that work.
Great. So Chris, as Melissa mentioned, there's certainly a lot of trauma involved in this entire process, this entire ordeal. And on your site and in your materials, you mentioned trauma-informed support. So I would love for you to be able to walk us through your programming. Like, what does extreme weather survivors provide to folks, and what exactly is trauma-informed support? And I would love to hear from Melissa and Erica from you both as to how this sort of programming has impacted the way that you've been able to deal with the recovery from these events and disasters.
Yeah, thanks. Well, clinically, trauma-informed support means that our organization and our programs acknowledge the presence of trauma with the folks that we're working with, and we build our programs accordingly, right? So it means that we call it the 4 R's. You're realizing the widespread impact of trauma, understanding potential and different paths for recovery, recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma, responding by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into our programs to make sure that the programs are trauma informed, and also sort of actively resisting re-traumatization. So that's a big important part of it as well. And I think being on this conversation with Melissa and Erica, because they were some of the first directly impacted folks I connected with, seeing from where we were then to where we are now, so much of the programming that we're building now is reflective of the conversations that I had with them early on about the lack of network that when something like this happens. And I don't think people understand just how traumatic it is. That was one of the first things that struck me when I was visiting with Melissa and some of the other small business owners that were impacted by the catastrophic floods in Vermont last year, was that, we connected about 9 months after the flooding, and the trauma of it was so evident and clear. And when I connected with Melissa 9 months after the floods, her restaurant still hadn't reopened. So I think people have this idea that the recovery process is quick, and you bounce back. And it's certainly true that humans naturally are very resilient. But in order to be as resilient as we can, we need to have the support from the government, from the community, from each other. And a big part of the gap that we're trying to fill is what we heard from those first conversations. There is no national community of people who've been directly impacted that you can ask the heartbreaking questions that you need to ask about how do you make difficult decisions about how to recover in a safe space in a supportive space with mental health professionals. So that's really what we're trying to do, trying to build that peer support network, recognizing the impacts of trauma that people have experienced, connecting people with mental health professionals and support groups that we're building. And then also, though, recognizing that there is power and strength in numbers, as Melissa was saying. And so as these disasters are happening to more and more communities and more people, that we're sort of connecting those communities and those people to demand that there is a stronger response and there's more funding for rebuilding and resiliency, and that there is more advocacy for clean energy and for holding polluters accountable.
Yeah, it's so important to, I think, really fill in those gaps that are left by the traditional sources of recourse that you can get from like policy and the government. So it's great to see this sort of building of community. It would be great to hear from Melissa or Erica, like what sort of resources did you actually receive from the government or from local sources in the aftermath of the events that you experienced? And do you think that these were sufficient, or is there an area that you thought could have been improved or addressed when dealing with these sorts of things?
When the flood happened, there's many levels, but most of the help was state funded or even city funded. There's an organization in Montpelier called Montpelier Alive that is an amazing local downtown business community. They used to be an organization that really just kind of put on art shows and festivals, but during the flooding, they became the organization that set up a hub to organize volunteers that came to help us clear the space out. And that, we had volunteer help to help us clear the muck and the slime, nasty flooding debris out for about a month. And it was incredible. Montpelier Alive also gathered donations and gave each business a small amount. The state gave us 2 rounds of, they called it BGAP funding. We got a little bit of insurance money. And then from the government, a lot of people don't know this, but when businesses get flooded, when FEMA comes in, FEMA gives money to homeowners, but they don't give money to businesses. Businesses, you have to take out an SBA loan. When you lost your business through a national disaster, you don't get money from the government. You have to take an SBA loan, which for us, because we had a 2-floored, very big restaurant space in downtown Montpelier, we also are the landlords of our space. A lot of the downtown businesses had a landlord that helped them with funding. We don't have that, so we had to do it all ourselves, and the rebuild cost us somewhere between $800,000 and $900,000, and the insurance money, BGAP money, and donations we got were like 300 and something thousand. So we had to take out a $500,000 small business loan, which we had to put our own home up for collateral in order to get that loan. And now we've got this huge other debt that we have under our business and a payment for however many years. And the other huge problem about this SBA loan is the amount of paperwork and bureaucracy you have to go through to even get the loan. It took us 9 months just to get that funding, which is traumatizing. It was so traumatizing because once we decided we were going to rebuild, we started rebuilding with the state money because that was quicker that we got. And so we're in the build process. Our employees are waiting and we didn't have funding to keep the project going. So we had to personally call friends and family to borrow money and keep it going. It was so incredibly stressful. And I don't know why it took 9 months for the funding to come, but it was horrible. And honestly, like after the month of like Montpelier Alive and all the volunteers coming, with community rallied to get us cleaned out from the flood. But beyond when that happened, like in the rebuild phase and everything, I didn't think there was enough support. I'm gonna just say, like, I don't think there was enough support. I felt pretty alone. I mean, I also live in a very rural area. Like, I live a little outside of Montpelier in a town that has less than 1,000 people. We live up in the woods, so it is rural, but I have felt pretty isolated since then. And I don't know, when Chris came to speak with me, and I have gone to speak on the panel with them, like there is something that is amazing about community when you like come together with other people who have gone through it. It is amazing to have community, and there's just something about not feeling alone in it. I don't know, like I think Chris said, there's something about like support in numbers that is healing when you've gone through a trauma like this. And I therefore want to also be the person who others can come to. Like, I just feel like, having community and support is what gets you through it, and it's very needed.
For sure. Building the knowledge base there and having that personal experience and being able to offer advice and things like that to people that are also in the same situation is critical, I think. But Erica, did you also have something to add for this one as well?
Yeah, so I would agree with Melissa. We were staggered by how the community rallied around us. So, in hard times, you expect your friends and family to show up, but what we didn't expect is just so many random strangers and local restaurants feeding us, and just local businesses clothing us. And they just went so above and beyond to show us that we were loved and supported and not forgotten through losing everything. And so we were overwhelmed by that community support. And to your question earlier, we were quite underwhelmed with government support. So you don't know until you're there, until you've lost everything, what that experience looks like. But quite honestly, FEMA gave us a few $100s, and we were vastly underinsured on 2 houses, our own and a rental property. And so we kind of day by day figured out the financial piece, a lot of spreadsheets, GoFundMe, and again, that community support helped to fill some of that underinsurance gap. And then, quite honestly, when you have a several $100,000 deficit, you just, you figure it out. And that's what we did, in large part, relied on community donations to build back our lives, because we couldn't afford it based on our insurance payouts. We thankfully were able to get to the other side and rebuild, but it was a long, hard, stressful road. And our kids were also 2 and 5 years old at the time of the fire. So our attention was split between practical finances and logistics and how do we rebuild, and FEMA and insurance, and also just back to the trauma-informed, helping our kids recover from this quite scary life event.
Yeah, how do you rebuild while you're also trying to take care of yourself, while you're also trying to take care of your kids? And I think one of the things that we hear from almost every single family that we talk to is, the insurance gap that people have. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that when a disaster happens, that the cavalry come in, and the amount of funding comes in to make people whole. And that's absolutely not the case. There's an insurance gap. If you're lucky enough to be able to get insurance, which we know from the fires in LA, some people weren't. And I think, Erica, you mentioned the long and winding road of recovery. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, people do jump in the aftermath in this amazing, beautiful way. You see, the best of humanity in so many ways. but also that there's a gap, year two, right? And people are in need of support in the long haul. Melissa, we were talking recently, talking about still trying to get back to where you were before. Erica, I know you're just back in your home 3 years later, and so there is this amazing outpouring of support. And naturally, that recedes a little bit, and so, and certainly from government sources, and so we really at Extreme Weather Survivors want to be part of helping to close a little bit of that gap in the years after, and making it easier for people to support, like Melissa, what you were saying, supporting people who are coming after you, which we know there will be more and more of these disasters, to help them make their road to recovery a little bit less awful than it was for you guys.
And is there any sort of policy that you would like to see implemented to close this insurance gap, or even just a paradigm shift, like a change in mindset that you would like to see among people to sustain this support? Is there any particular specific thing that you would want to advocate for or support seeing from the government or other sources?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that can be done. I think there's part of this is at the federal level, part of this is at the state level. We talk about, advocating for accelerating the transition to clean energy, accountability for polluters, making polluters pay, that we worked with Melissa on, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. But also, making communities more resilient to extreme weather impacts. Climate change is here. It is a reality that we're living with. And so even as we need to accelerate that transition to clean energy to reduce the future impacts, we also need to live with the reality that these disasters are happening with more frequency and more severity. And so how can we make communities more resilient right now? And then also advocate for more support for people who have been and who will be harmed by extreme weather. Was really honored to work with Melissa on First Nation bipartisan climate super fund bill that passed in Vermont, that she did amazing advocacy work, sharing her story, helping lawmakers there understand what the community was still struggling with. But that, at the end of the day, that's not a short-term fix, and it's not an all-in-one fix. There's a lot more that has to happen. And that's, part of what we're trying to push for here.
Absolutely. And Melissa or Erica, is there any advice that you would want to offer people that maybe end up in similar situations? Anything that you could provide to people listening?
I'll jump in there. So I was actually meant to officially join Extreme Weather Survivors in mid-January. And on, I believe, January 7th, the most destructive fire in California history broke out, right? The LA fires. And we jumped right into creating a space to do exactly that. So in the Marshall Fire, the fire in which I lost my home, our community, kind of as a grassroots effort, created a space in Slack where we could talk to each other, share information, vent, help each other make big decisions, and you name it, it was there. And that is what was a critical tool in both recovering and also rebuilding our neighborhood, which we did kind of much faster than all of the national averages and quicker than I think we were expected to rebuild. And I think we did it in large part due to having a space to convene and kind of a hub of information sharing. And so when the LA fires broke out, we created a similar space for LA, bringing in LA fire impacted community as well as people impacted by past wildfires, and vetted experts on various critical topics like environmental health physicians and industrial hygienists and insurance advocates, all into this space to talk and share and support one another. And I'm proud to say a month in, we're well over 800 strong now and growing every day. And actually today we're having an Ask an Expert Q&A about the path to rebuilding. So we have experts on mortgage and researchers on rebuilding from past wildfires, and a member of the local government who helped to remove barriers to rebuilding and maximize efficiency to his jurisdiction rebuilding. And so we are creating a space to help and support, and to Melissa's point, help people feel that you are not alone in this. There are many people who have walked in these shoes before you, and unfortunately, likely many more to come in the future who will walk that path. And so what can we do to recover smarter and better and do it together?
Absolutely. I mean, closing the knowledge gap is so important to be able to share these sorts of resources, especially given the fires in LA. So that's incredible that you've been able to garner so much interest and support and be able to communicate with all these people that are going through similar things. That's a very powerful tool. But Melissa, over to you, if you have any advice or anything that you would want to share for people going through similar situations.
I think when something like that happens, it can feel incredibly overwhelming, and like, I don't even know how to explain it. Like there were definitely times through it that I felt really, really alone and really like terrified and overwhelmed and like, I don't know. It's hard to explain the feeling, but the things that would help me to come out of that feeling of feeling like I can't handle this, or like, I don't know, just that helpless feeling that comes when you're going through something like that. The things that helped were community, like networking, like we definitely had a downtown business network that formed, and we just started meeting every Wednesday morning, and we started, talking to the mayor, talking to the city manager, talking to the legislatures and the senators and the Congress people, and having meetings at the State House. And we just started like together, just talking about what our needs were. And, kind of like what Chris mentioned, one of the biggest fears, I think, for most of us in downtown Montpelier is that these things are going to happen more and more. I mean, this is part of our reality now. And Montpelier a lot of Vermont happens to have downtowns that are kind of in floodplains that are in the valleys. And so we're worried, like, now we've spent all this money to rebuild. Are we just going to get flooded again and again? And so we just have been talking about that. And our local community formed groups, I guess, like there is a resiliency group. There is groups that are trying to talk about how to mitigate flooding in the future, which was really important to me, because when we did decide to rebuild, it was traumatizing to think we now had to take out a loan, put our house as collateral, have more debt, rebuild our business, and maybe get flooded again. Like, it's not that it's not a reality that it still could happen, but at least there's conversation about how can we rebuild differently? How can Montpelier deal with this? It's very slow going, and I think that these policies kind of need to be moving quicker, because I don't think the climate's going to wait. It's happening faster and faster, so these things need to be moving faster than they are. But at least knowing that there's a whole community talking about it, trying to deal with it, you're not alone in it. I don't know, there is something helpful about having groups of people network together to try to talk about it and create change and form community. And even just going to the panel in New York with the extreme weather survivors, like, there is something that's really helpful about bonding together and speaking out about what's needed, and trying to like make policy changes that can help, because as a world, like, that is honestly, like, it is something that also helped me to not feel so isolated, is knowing that, like, as a world, the whole world is going to have to be dealing with this more and more and more. It's part of our reality now. And so, we need to really come together and figure out how we're going to get through it, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, you guys are really, when I think about our conversations, right, like pioneers in helping more Americans understand what the impacts of extreme weather will be. And that's really, really heartbreaking. But I think it's also, really powerful that you guys that we're working together to try to bring this change. And I think, I think about this a lot, right? That something like climate change, which is just so almost catastrophically huge to try to understand, right? We're just not wired that way emotionally, but people can really understand stories, and they can really understand, the impact to one person in some ways better than they can understand, national impacts of climate change. And so I think the work that you all have done to share your story, to shine a spotlight on the impacts, to help more Americans understand that climate change is here now, it's happening, it's impacting people and love, but also that there are solutions and there are things that we can do to make this less likely to happen to other people in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, storytelling is a powerful tool, hence why we are on the podcast here today, to tell people's stories about climate action and how to move forward. And I think that is the sad reality, as Melissa had stated, like, as the climate crisis continues to worsen, more and more people will be affected. There will be no shortage of extreme weather survivors out there. So I think what you all are doing to build this community and move forward and be resilient is just remarkable. So we are just about at time. And to close us out, Chris, I would love to hear from you. What is next for extreme weather survivors? What can we expect from your organization moving forward in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. We are really focusing on, continuing to listen to the folks that we work with to understand what is most needed and what comes next. So, Erica mentioned building this Slack space and community where people can connect with each other, connect with disaster recovery experts. So we're looking at how can we expand this to more communities that have been impacted, so people can benefit from all the resource and knowledge that past survivors have shared in that space. And so that's something that we're really thinking about. We're also really thinking about, even as these heartbreaking national disasters that receive, the declarations are so important. We also want to make sure that people who are impacted by low visibility disasters, maybe on smaller scale, that we're also connecting with them and bringing them into this community. They are not able to access any of the limited resources that people are able to access from when they're impacted by national disasters and disaster declarations. And thinking about this summer, right? We know this summer extreme weather season is going to be awful and heartbreaking and deadly, and it's going to impact communities that we will be surprised by. Thinking about Hurricane Helene dumping 40 inches of rain in Asheville last fall. It's everywhere, right? And so making sure that our resources are ready to go to deploy and to support people who are impacted this summer. Thinking about the campaigns to raise awareness, to shine a spotlight on the stories of folks that we worked with is really something that we're focusing on this summer. And just making sure that we're able to be a resource to people in this country, wherever and whenever they're impacted, is really a focus now after having, we just launched last year, and after 1 year of really building the program slowly, we're really trying to scale it now so that it can be accessible to anyone, anywhere. If you are impacted and you are looking to connect, you can come to our website, extremeweathersurvivors.org. There's a way to sign up for our email list. We'll get you plugged into the Slack community, and we'll get you plugged into the network to offer support.
Wonderful. Thanks again for tuning in, and a special shout out to our guests, Chris Kotcher, Melissa Whitaker, and Erica Solove. Be sure to check us out online at climategroup.org. Climate Group's 50 Shades of Green is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. Stay well, and we'll see you next time.